and welcome to Based on a True Story, the podcast that compares your favorite Hollywood movies with history. Today we're going to learn about the 1993 movie called Gettysburg. That movie was written and directed by Ronald Maxwell, adapted from a 1974 novel by Michael Shara called The Killer Angels. Now, even though the movie is based on a novel, the movie is about a very real battle that took place in and around Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, over the course of 3 days during the American Civil War. That was July 1st through July 3rd, 1863. Now, this is a movie that we have covered on the podcast before. That was episode number 160, when we had a chat with Gettysburg Battlefield Guide's Jim Hessler and Eric Lindblad. Our discussion today is not a replacement to that. It's intended to be a supplement. But of course, we are talking about the same movie, so there's going to be some overlap. Plus, episode 160 came out years ago, so maybe you haven't heard that one yet. And that's okay. As I mentioned, this is a supplement, so you don't have to listen to the other Gettysburg episode to enjoy this one. Really, it's just that there's a lot of information to cover. After all, this movie is a long one. It's 254 minutes, or 271 minutes if you're watching the director's cut. That's over 4 hours long, any way you look at it. 4.5 hours if you're talking about the director's cut. Today, we'll be chatting with Professor Gregory J.W. Urwin from Temple University. Gregory is an author and military historian who we've had on the podcast a number of times before, so I'm excited to connect with him again to talk about Gettysburg. Before we connect with Gregory, though, we have to set up our game, Two Truths and a Lie. Now, if you're new to the show, here's how it works. I'm about to give you 3 things. 2 of them are true, and that means one of them is a lie. Are you ready? Okay, here they are. Number 1, Pickett's charge happened on the 3rd day of battle. Number 2, the Battle of Gettysburg was the final battle of the Civil War. Number 3, General Lee's men called themselves Lee's Miserables. Got them? Okay, now as you're listening to our story today, your challenge is to identify which one is a lie. And then, of course, we'll do a recap at the end of the episode to see how well you did. All right, now it's time to connect with Gregory J.W. Urwin about the historical accuracy of Gettysburg. Let's start, as we normally do here on the podcast, with a letter grade for historical accuracy, but let's do it with a little bit of a twist, because this movie was a huge production that had to have had a lot of details to try to attain historical accuracy. So we'll kick off with kind of a 2-part question. What letter grade would you give Gettysburg for historical accuracy? And can you share some of the lengths that the filmmakers went to make the movie?
Sure. Now, as a historian, I'm used to being critical, but I like this movie for a number of reasons. I'd give it a B overall. I think, it tells the basic story. 2 sides square off at Gettysburg and the Confederates lose. No surprises there. It's based on a Pulitzer Prize winning novel by Michael Shara, The Killer Angels, which was a big hit when it came out. In fact, a number of history professors, including the faculty at the U.S. Military Academy, used it as their text for teaching Gettysburg because the basic facts were right. And the story was so compelling, they thought that young people would get more out of that than just, a straight history of the battle. And the movie is pretty much faithful to the book. So, yeah, the author took certain liberties and was partial to certain characters. He relied a lot on the writings of Joshua Chamberlain, the autobiography and other writings of James Longstreet, the Civil War diary of Arthur Fremantle, the British military observer who is depicted in the film. So we see a lot of the battle through their eyes, but historians favor certain sources too. So, I'm not going to begrudge a movie for interpreting certain fine points differently than I would. As far as production values were concerned, the folks who made this, it was originally made as a TV miniseries by Ted Turner, I think for for TNT, one of his two networks. He was doing a number of historical films, a lot of them on the Civil War in the 1990s. And then he acquired New Line Cinema and wanted to test its distribution powers. So they put out a 4-hour feature film with an intermission, which attracted
stress test right there.
huge numbers of Civil War buffs, of course. It wasn't a blockbuster hit, but it lives on digitally. Lots of people watch it. Lots of teachers use it in their classes to teach the Battle of Gettysburg. So it's still with us, and it's folks who live in Gettysburg love it because it helps to draw in the tourists as well. But to make a movie about the biggest battle waged on the North American continent, the battle that many consider the turning point of the Civil War, you needed numbers back then. You couldn't rely on CGI. So the producers appealed to the reenactor community. They had a core group, I think, of about 250 guys who got a minimum wage. But everyone else, we'll feed you and we'll give you a place to pitch your tent, but you're working for free. But they struck a deal with the National Park Service, and they were able to film parts of it on the national park, on the actual battlefield. For instance, half of Pickett's charge, the first half, before they reached the Emmitsburg Road, was shot on the actual ground that Pickett's veterans marched over. So if you're a Confederate reenactor, especially if your great-great-great-great-great-granddaddy was at Gettysburg, the chance to walk over that ground, to kind of recreate that moment in history was irresistible. And they got altogether about 5,000 reenactors to work on the film. With camera angles, they make them look even more numerous. And for the Pickett's charge sequence, from what I've read, about 3,000 men participated in that. And again, with camera angles, they made it look like 13,000. Now, the great thing about reenactors is they come with their own costumes, which are usually more accurate than what you'd get from a Hollywood costume warehouse. They come with their own props, meaning the weapons and equipment, and they're organized into units, and they're trained in the rudiments of Civil War drill. So if a director says, "Okay, I want to send a battle line across this shot here," the unit commanders know how to set their men up, and they just go where the directors tell them to go. And of course, there are artillery units among Civil War reenactors and cavalry units among Civil War reenactors, and that I think they reimbursed the artillery for the gunpowder they used, but still, they were able to save a lot of money and get a lot of bodies that looked pretty good, looked better than the actors at times on screen. Now, the trouble with reenactors are there's no age limit. If you could still stagger around, you could reenact. I'm dressed as the world's oldest Union infantry major. I'm in my late 60s. Most of the guys who held this rank at Gettysburg were in their 20s, maybe their early 30s. So please suspend your disbelief. And some guys were kind of heavy. I mean, one of the things that cracked me up at the beginning of the movie, when the Confederate spy is trying to get back into Confederate lines with this report, he gets stopped by a Confederate sergeant who looks like a misplaced Santa Claus. This guy would not have been able to make the march down the Shenandoah Valley and across Maryland into Pennsylvania. But again, a minor irritant, you suspend your disbelief. But overall, uniforms, formations, colors, flags, they all added an aura of authenticity that enables me to enjoy the movie. I don't know if anyone else cares. Well, thousands of reenactors do, but it enables me to enjoy the movie.
According to the movie, in June of 1863, Robert Ely, the Confederate general, crosses the Potomac River to invade Union territory. This is kind of setting up the battle itself. And he's with the Confederate Army of Northern Virginia. His intent in the movie is to draw out and then destroy the Union Army in an attempt to force peace. How well does the movie do establishing the situation surrounding the Battle of Gettysburg?
Well, that prelude is what I call dramatic buildup. And there's a certain degree of exaggeration there. In the spring of 1863, May, June, July, Ulysses S. Grant is in the process of isolating and besieging Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is the last Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River. The Confederacy faces being cut in half. And a lot of pressure is being put on Lee after Chancellorsville. Okay, you whip those Yankees. They're going to be a while recovering. Send some troops west. And Lee, whose main motive for joining the Confederacy was to defend Virginia, he doesn't want to send any of his troops out of theater. They might get butchered under another commander. The Confederate commanders in the West weren't that good, or he may never get them back. So he says, if I go north and threaten possibly Baltimore, Harrisburg, Washington, he didn't even say if I take them. He just said if I threaten them, that will do more for Vicksburg than by sending any of my troops there. The Yankees will pull men away from the Mississippi Valley, which was only Robert E. Lee could have gotten away with making that argument, I think. He'll also say that he did this to take the war out of Virginia, where for more than a year, these contending armies, although they had rations supplied by their respective governments, they're living off the land. They're stripping Virginia farms where they operate of livestock, of harvested crops, etc. And Lee wants the North to pay the price of the war. Let's go into Pennsylvania, which is rich farmland, the Pennsylvania Dutch up there, and I'll feed my army off Yankee largesse or Yankee affluence, Yankee bounty. That's a better word. The idea that he's going to fight his way into Washington and storm into the White House, throw a letter on Lincoln's desk saying, surrender Dorothy. That really wasn't something that maybe in a happy dream while he was slumbering, that wasn't really something that was practical. Washington was ringed by extensive defenses and had its own garrison, thousands and thousands of troops, heavy artillery regiments, etc. Even had its own cavalry division, although it gives that to the Army of the Potomac in the midst of this campaign. So Lee wants to throw a scare into the Federals. The North is already, this war has gone on longer and has resulted in more deaths and heavier expenditures than anybody anticipated. And Lee, time and time again, he just whips the Army of the Potomac, the North's largest field army. Drives the Federals off the peninsula, surprises the Yankees and routs them at the Second Battle of Bull Run, butchers them when they stupidly charge him behind stone walls at Fredericksburg, and again flanks them and routs them at Chancellorsville, where he's outnumbered 2-1. And even though after the initial clash, he's still outnumbered, he has so unhinged his opposition that the best thing they could think of doing is we got to save our army, we've got to retreat. So he's built up this image of invincibility, and there's great discouragement throughout the North. And if he can go north and do what he wants, at least give that appearance, and if he can whip the Army of the Potomac in its home court, on its own ground, he's hoping that will have political repercussions. The Lincoln administration there'll be fewer Republicans in Congress to support the Lincoln administration, and there's a presidential election coming up the following year. There's also, still kind of a faint hope that if the Confederates can win their version of Saratoga, the turning point of the American Revolution, the British and the French will intervene, and and that will assure Confederate independence. So he has a variety of motives, but they really play it up because this is going to be the showdown. This is going to be the battle that we either win or we lose, that kind of thing.
Yeah, even in the beginning, before the battle begins, there were multiple scenes, little bits of dialogue and stuff that a lot of the impression I got from a lot of the military commanders on both sides of the conflict seem to believe that this is going to be the battle determining the outcome of the war, even before the battle ever began. But it sounds like maybe there wasn't quite as much truth to that idea that the entire war would be decided by this one battle before it even began.
Well, military people, they don't go into a campaign thinking win some, lose some. What? Their efforts to have a major impact. You don't ask people to fight and die and say, well, this is just part of a process, guys. It's gonna be a long haul. Sure, I'm sure people were hoping that Confederates were hoping we're going to destroy the enemy and the Yankees will have no choice but to give up. They hoped they could do that at first Bull Run. Civil War armies, you could batter them, but they were really hard to destroy. Because the nature of Civil War combat meant that win or lose, you suffer a lot of casualties. You expend a lot of ammunition. If you're in enemy territory, too, you're only carrying a limited amount. Even if you win a battle, if you shoot away most of your artillery ammunition, you're not going to go back into action anytime soon. You're going to wait to be replenished. And Lee would have depended on wagon trains coming up from Virginia. The Federals were often able to operate near bodies of water, and they had naval superiority, so they could establish depots with lots of surplus and resupply quicker than a Confederate army operating deep in enemy territory. So, the odds that Lee was going to strike a war-winning blow, outside of psychologically. I mean, if he won a big enough victory, then that might get people in the North to decide this just isn't worth cost. We've got to find some way to disengage. So, but he's really running a kind of a giant raid, giving the Yankees a taste of their own medicine, and keeping his own army together. To him is important because the defense of Virginia is paramount in his mind. And the Confederate capital is at Richmond too, so Virginia is an important strategic factor.
In the movie, the very first day of the battle is July 1st, 1863. And in the movie, it almost seems like the start of the battle is a mistake. General Lee wants to wait until all of his forces are concentrated before attacking. But one of the generals under his command, General Hill, thinks that there's only some militia in town and his men need shoes. So he's going to go into town to get shoes. Then he finds out that what he thought was only militia turns out to be dismounted cavalry. So they put up more of a much more strong fight than they were expecting. And they hold off the Confederates for long enough for more infantry corps to arrive. And before long, General Lee just realizes that the fighting's already underway. So he orders all his commanders to attack. How well does the movie do showing how the Battle of Gettysburg actually started?
I think pretty good. As you say, General Robert E. Lee was not seeking an all-out engagement, a general engagement, as he would have put it, at Gettysburg, nor was the Union commander, Major General George Gordon Meade. Meade had drawn up tentative plans to deploy along a defensive position at Pipe Creek, somewhat to the south of Gettysburg, and hoped that Lee would attack him there and they could have a Fredericksburg in reverse. But, in war, you can desire something, but then circumstances force your hand. Gettysburg was a natural magnet because it was a crossroads. There were at least 8, maybe more roads feeding in to Gettysburg. So if you have armies that are spread out, because you can't put an entire army on one road, you have this long column, 20 miles or more. If you run into the enemy, the troops up front are going to get mangled while they're waiting for everyone else to try to come up and extend the line. So, both armies have elements traveling on different roads. The Federals are trying to keep themselves between Lee and Washington and Baltimore because they're not sure what his intentions are, and they have a certain inferiority complex. They believe Lee can actually do more at times than reason would dictate. And Lee, as you say, he starts to concentrate his army. Part of it is because he's traveling blind. His top cavalry commander, Major General Jeb Stuart, took off on June 25th to ride around the Union Army to cause some havoc, maybe interrupt the enemy's logistics, heighten the apprehensions of Northerners. And while that may have seemed like a good idea at the time, when Stuart tries to get back to Lee, he keeps bumping into formations of Union cavalry. Brigadier General John Buford, who is pictured helping to trigger the first day's fighting, he commands only one of 3 cavalry divisions belonging to the Army of the Potomac. And there are others that are looking for Stuart and clashing with Stuart. And when Stuart runs into them while he's trying to head west, he has to then detour further north to get around them, etc., which keeps him from reaching Lee until July 2nd, after the battle has been commenced, as Lee's deep into that fight. Now, Stuart took only 3 brigades of cavalry with him. He left Lee 3 or 4 brigades, but Lee had this very personal command style. There were certain subordinates with whom it was kind of like husband and wife. They could read each other's mind. Lee would give general instructions, and the subordinate, like Thomas Stonewall Jackson, who's dead by this time, he's killed at Chancellorsville, or Jeb Stuart, will fulfill. And Stuart was able to bring Lee intelligence that Lee found actionable. And these other commanders, these other cavalry commanders that are with Lee, they're just not up to the job, or Lee just finds them wanting. So the Confederates, they're assembling. They've come out of the Shenandoah, and they're trying to come together. And Gettysburg is just a natural convergence point. But as you say, they don't expect to run into heavy opposition when they move on Gettysburg. Harry Heath's division goes in. He's part of A.P. Hill's First Corps. Goes in on the morning of July 1st. And when he gets about 2 miles, more than 2 miles out from Gettysburg, he runs into a thin line of cavalry pickets or vedettes, thin outpost line in a place called Knoxland Ridge. And they open fire. And this is the kind of the advance outposts of Buford's Union cavalry. And Buford, he sees that McPherson's Ridge, northwest of Gettysburg, is defensible ground. To get infantry there, they could hold it. And that Gettysburg is a good place to assemble the Army of the Potomac, because all roads in the vicinity seem to lead to Gettysburg. So he's determined to buy as much time as he can to hold the Confederates at bay so that Meade can get his infantry to Gettysburg, or more specifically, so that the commander of half of Meade's army, Major General John F. Reynolds, who's commanding the left wing of the Army of the Potomac, can rush infantry to the vicinity. And he fights this delaying action. The Confederates are coming down a road, but when they run into opposition, they've got to now throw down the fences on either side of the road and go from a 4-man column into a line of battle, or at least to throw out skirmishers, and that takes some time, and you pick your way forward. Can't do that quickly because you're hugging cover and you all get picked off. And these cavalrymen, they open fire, and then when the rebels draw near, they fall back. And there are more cavalrymen when they stop. And so the rebels come down the road, then they've got to redeploy and unlimber artillery. And this is repeated over and over again And in this way, Buford is able to delay the rebels for about 2 hours. It's not until about 10:30 that Harry Heath's leading two brigades are up and deployed and ready to attack McPherson's Ridge. And that's when General Reynolds and one of his corps, the corps he had formerly commanded before he became a wing commander, the First Corps, his leading brigades are there. Lysander Cutler's brigade deploys astride McPherson's Ridge, and then to the left, facing Herbst Woods, uh, uh, is the Iron Brigade, the men in the black hats, the Westerners who wouldn't wear the little forage caps, but wear the old regulation dress, pilgrim hat, as some of them called it, or the hardy hat, etc. But that's their trademark. And so the rebels know this is a militia. If they weren't sure of that before they got to McPherson's Ridge, then they know for sure. No, look at those damn black hats. It's the Army of the Potomac.
Yeah, but at that point, it's already too late. They've already run into them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a division engaged, and it's getting roughed up. Heath's two leading brigades, they don't show this in the movie, but they get mauled. They get driven back by the First Corps. And so the gauntlet has been thrown down. Lee is leading an army of men who feel they have beaten the Yankees every time they've met them. And to back away from this challenge would not be good for morale. Would not be good for morale. And Lee can see again that Gettysburg is a natural place to concentrate his army. Richard Ewell's Second Corps, which had menaced Carlisle further north, is coming down now on the roads leading to the northern approaches of the town, and Longstreet's First Corps can come up behind A.P. Hill's Corps and deploy as well. So this may not have been the spot where Lee sought a battle, but it turns out to be usable, to work in his mind, especially because he's able to get more men to Gettysburg by the end of the first day, and they're able to defeat and rout the Union troops that oppose them, drive them back, drive them east and then south out of Gettysburg and onto the high ground south of the town, which turns out to be pretty defensible too, maybe even better than McPherson's Ridge. And that sets the stage for the next 2 days of the Battle of Gettysburg.
According to the movie, after the first day of the battle, we do see that the Confederate Army has pushed back the Union Army in their positions and forced them to retreat. General Lee says something to the effect of, couldn't have worked out better if we'd planned it, suggesting again that they didn't really plan it to be that way. And then General Longstreet points out that they pushed back 2 corps, but there's still 5 more coming. So with the sun going down on the first day of fighting stops, and then we see some conversation between the commanders on both the Confederate and Union side. And the impression that I got from these scenes at the end of the first day was that both sides had victories during the day, but neither side really considered it to be over yet. They knew the next day was going to bring a lot more fighting. Was the outcome of the battle at the first day essentially just a toss-up at that point, like the movie suggests?
Yeah, I think either side could have won at that point. Now, the Confederates are probably feeling better than their Union opponents because they end up carrying the day, albeit with some heavy casualties. A.P. Hill's Corps suffers, in addition to Heath's division, 2 others come up and they suffer pretty substantial losses and forcing the Federals back. The Federals overall suffer even more. But Lee has 2 more. He's got Longstreet's Corps, which is fresh. Ewell's Corps saw some action north of town, didn't suffer as much as A.P. Hill's. But still, Lee has got a substantial body of fresh troops under his most veteran corps commander. Before Gettysburg, the Army of Northern Virginia was divided into 2 corps, one under Longstreet, one under Stonewall Jackson. And when Jackson dies, Lee divides his army up into 3 corps and gives two of the corps to fresh commanders. The third to A.P. Hill, and the second, Jackson's old corps, goes to Richard Ewell. So he feels that his army is still potent. It hasn't spent its force, and they showed their mastery over the Yankees once again. But as the movie has Longstreet exhibiting extraordinary prescience and saying, "Well, most of his army hasn't been engaged as yet, and they're coming up. They're coming up, and Meade will decide to hold that defensive position. It's a risk, but it's even riskier to turn your back on an enemy and try to get away from him. So Meade is going to pick, I think, the more courageous option, and he's only been in command of the Army of the Potomac since June 28th. He gets in just about 3 days before the battle breaks out. He doesn't know that. He knows his old Fifth Corps. He'd been commanding the Fifth Corps before he became Army commander, but he doesn't know the other components intimately. He has to rely on the staff of the man he replaced, fighting Joe Hooker. And a lot of those people despise him because he's replacing their beloved boss. And they have to know that once things calm down after this fight, he's going to replace them too. He's going to bring in his own people to run the army. But he's going to have to rely on his subordinate commanders to make a lot of the decisions. And he starts that right off the bat. When he finds out that there's fighting on the 1st at Gettysburg, he'll pick a very promising senior Union commander, Major General Winfield Scott Hancock, who's commanding the Union Army Second Corps. And he says, "Right on ahead and assess the situation and make whatever dispositions you think proper. You're my deputy." And Hancock will do that. Hancock's really the one who says, "Yeah, this is the ground we're going to fight on." He chooses the hills and the ridge that become that upside down fishhook line that the Federals will hold through the rest of the battle.
You mentioned briefly the Longstreet mentioning the Corps, and he does do that in the movie. He mentions that there's more people coming from General Meade's army, but also you had mentioned Stuart wasn't there yet, so they were kind of going blind. Did they really know? Did the Confederates really know that the Union still had more coming?
Well, they had a general picture of the shape of the armies before the campaign begins, and they're just going to assume that the Federals are coming to this location because the guys they whipped aren't running away. But that's one of the interesting things about this battle, about this campaign. Up to this point in time, or at least up until the spring of 1863, the Union cavalry had been kind of a negligible factor because it was poorly used. It was dispersed in small units, escorts for generals and just small screening forces, etc. And the Confederates had taken 4 or 5 regiments and formed them into brigades. And then Stuart had, I think, 7 brigades that's operating as a giant division. So, if the Confederate cavalry before this time ran into Union mounted troops, there wasn't much opposition. They just sweep them aside. But Joseph Hooker, who's the butt of a lot of humor, when he commanded the Army of the Potomac early in 1863, he formed his cavalry into a corps. He took regiments and combined them into brigades and brigades into divisions. So now the Union cavalry has the kind of mass required to prevent Stuart from pushing them around. In fact, they surprised him just as Lee's getting ready to march north at Brandy Station on June, I think it's 9th, 1863. They catch him sleeping in his camp, and he's able to fend them off. He's very good. He reacts quickly. but he's humiliated the Richmond press, who had been treating him as their golden boy, making fools of the Yankees throughout 1862, saying, what's with this guy? His reputation's gone to his head. That's another reason why he wants to conduct this raid. He wants favorable headlines again. He also thinks he's going to serve a strategic purpose, but Lee's not getting the intelligence he needs. The Union cavalry is providing the intelligence that Union commanders need. John Buford, he has his outposts. They capture Confederate prisoners. They find out what unit they belong to. They know this regiment belongs to this brigade. This brigade belongs to this division. This division belongs to this corps. And Buford is sending every bit of information he gets to his superiors, so they're able to take these puzzle pieces and start putting the picture together. I mean, intelligence is always iffy, and you can have an abundance of information. It depends on what you do with it. But the Union cavalry is doing its job. And then he does something Union cavalry doesn't normally do. He turns his troopers into mounted infantry, in effect. He has them dismount in sets of fours. One guy takes care of 4 horses, takes them behind a ridge where they're safe from any cannon fire and rifle fire. And the other 3 guys, it's a lot easier to aim when you're on the ground than on a moving horse. They fight this delaying action. When the enemy gets too close, they retire behind the ridge, get on those horses, scurry away, set up a new defensive line, and play the game over again. So, and it's interesting, too, there was a prejudice against the cavalry in the Union Army. Early histories of Gettysburg make hardly any mention of what Buford did. This has changed over time. One of the things that helped change that perception, though, and to get historians to look more seriously at the Union cavalry, was the Killer Angels and this movie.
If we go back to the movie, the second day of the battle is July 2nd, 1863. And the impression that I got while I was watching the movie was that some of the most important fighting on the second day took place at Little Round Top. Even though General Hood points out that the Union soldiers are entrenched on the hill and an attack would be devastating, the attack is ordered anyway. Then on the Union side, we see Colonel Chamberlain's men defending an area that the movie just calls below the summit as the extreme left of the Union Army. Chamberlain's men are, I think there's some dialogue in there that mentions, they're the end of the line. So if they were overrun, the Confederates can flank the rest of the Union Army. And before long, we see Confederate soldiers climbing the hill, Chamberlain's Union soldiers firing down at them. The fighting seems to happen in waves. The Confederates advance, then they're driven back after a brief pause, and they come back, only be driven back again. And this happens time and time again. Despite what looks like overwhelming numbers, it's hard to, you mentioned camera angles and stuff, it's hard to pinpoint exactly how many people are, but just seems like waves of attacking Confederates are coming. There's a lot of close calls. There's bayonet charge down the hill due to running out of ammunition on the Union side. But Chamberlain's men seem to be able to hold the line. Was the movie accurately portraying both the importance of Chamberlain's position as well as what happened there?
Well, yeah, basically. It's interesting. The battle on July 2nd. I mean, Lee is planning his next move the night of the 1st and sends out an engineer to reconnoiter the Union left, because he's hoping to pull another Chancellorsville, get on the Federal flank and roll up the line. And this engineer, I don't know how close this guy came to Yankee troops or not, but he reports back that the Federal left flank ends where the Pennsylvania Monument stands today, not that far from where Pickett's charge goes in on July 3rd. And that, I mean, the Federals, the troops that came up in the night, they ended up occupying much more land south of that. So the July 2nd dawns, and Lee has a council of war with Longstreet and some other commanders. And he basically tells Longstreet, okay, I want you to go down to opposite the Union left flank, which he thinks, is much shorter than it was. And I want you to march up the Emmitsburg Road and just roll them up, flank them and drive them out. And Longstreet, who's made it clear that he's not quite sure this is the place to fight, And this is the way to fight the Yankees. He'd rather get in a defensive position that threatened the enemy strategically so that the Yankees would do what they did at Fredericksburg, attack the Confederates and suffer heavy casualties out in the open while the Rebs were undercover. He says, well, I've got 3 divisions. Pickett's far back. It's like he's not going to get here until tomorrow, but I've got basically two divisions here. But one is missing a brigade. This was part of John Bell Hood's division. And he says, Law's brigade isn't here. So Lee tells him attack as early as practicable. And he decides to wait for that one missing brigade, which doesn't get there until like 11:30. He blows the whole morning. The movie doesn't show this, but he blows the whole morning waiting. Then he takes off, marching to get around the left end of the Union line. And at one point, his troops come up over a rise, and Confederate commanders realize, holy cow, the Yankees can see us from here because they're on some of that high ground. So Longstreet about face, and he countermarches, which kills more time to put a ridge between his troops and the Federals. And by the time he finally gets into position to attack, it's 4 p.m. It's 4 p.m. The movie doesn't show this because it's following Longstreet's version of the story. He throws away basically most of the second day. And you have to wonder, is he just, he doesn't seem to be himself. And are these legitimate reasons? Is he being surly? Is he dragging his feet? I mean, he does send his troops in eventually, and they fight like hellions. But by the time he gets into position to attack, the Federals, their line should have extended all the way down what one can visualize as the shank of that upside-down fishhook, Cemetery Ridge, all the way down to Little Round Top. But there's another fly in the ointment there. The Union commander in charge of the troops at the southern end of the line, Major General Daniel E. Sickles, he commands the 3rd Corps. He sees in front of him a peach orchard on a high rise of ground. And he says, boy, if the rebels get artillery up there, they're going to butcher my guys. So I'm going to advance, and I'm going to move in front of the rest of the line, and I'm going to occupy that high ground. I'm not going to tell General Meade this is what I'm doing. I'm not going to keep contact. My flanks are going to be at the air, but I'm going to occupy this forward position. Sickles was a politician turned soldier, a congressman from New York. He would have been a wonderful character in this movie, an inveterate womanizer. Had all kinds of affairs, but when his wife had an affair with the descendant of Francis Scott Key, he shot him down in Washington, D.C., and then get off. He's the first person to be acquitted due to the insanity defense. And because he's an important New York Democratic politician, Lincoln, to get him to support the war effort, makes him a general. Meade is stuck with this loose cannon. But, this is not open ground like the Confederates envisioned. Longstreet has to now eliminate Sickles. And a lot of Sickles guys are in the woods, and they're in this peach orchard. South of the woods, there's a rock formation called Devil's Den. There's a ridge in front of it called Hook's Ridge. There's a brigade of Union troops there. And they are way far in front of the hill known as Little Round Top. The Confederates are going to have to blast through that force. And that is a fierce fight. Those Union troops do a pretty good job. They're pretty tenacious. In the end, they're overwhelmed. They're facing an entire division, John Bell Hood's division. But Hood's division fractures. Some of them are attacking the Federals on Hook's Ridge. Some go around the Federal left flank through a kind of a valley, a depression, and move on Little Round Top. Little Round Top. Little Round Top, is the best viewpoint, elevated viewpoint, if you want to see the battlefield. So, it's a logical objective for the Confederates to take, and it's undefended. It's undefended. Sickles didn't place any troops there, put them in front. But there is Meade's chief engineer, Brigadier General Gouverneur K. Warren. He sees what's happening, and he says, we got to get infantry up here. So he'll send an aide down. There are units of the Union Fifth Corps that are coming up. Fifth Corps, this badge I have on my left breast is their Corps badge, First Division. That's where the 20th Maine came from. But this aide runs into this brigade commanded by Colonel Strong Vincent, who is pictured in the movie, and says, we got to get troops up there. The Rebs are going to take that eminence. Where's your division commander? And no one can find this guy. Rumor has it he was drunk, But Vincent, on his own authority, orders be damned, leads his brigade up there and places his 4 regiments facing south. The front of Little Round Top, the western face of Little Round Top, is really steep, really hard to climb. But the southern side is sloping ground. So if the Rebs are going to try and come up this hill, they're going to come up the easier way. And Vincent deploys his brigade, the 16th Michigan Regiment on the right, 44th New York. Next to it, Vincent's old regiment, the 83rd Pennsylvania from Erie, Pennsylvania. And then at the far left of his line, the 20th Maine. And according to Chamberlain's testimony, as shown in the movie, Vincent says, you have to hold this to the last. We are the left flank. If the rebels get past us, they can get into the rear. They can cause all kinds of trouble. So the movie does a good job of showing Vincent's brigade getting position. And it doesn't really show what's happening to Hood's division, other than it clears Hook's Ridge, it clears it clears Devil's Den, and then moves on. Well, a portion of it is already moving on Little Round Top before that fight along Hook's Ridge is decided. So it's a big, messy thing. The Yankees aren't where the Rebs expect. The Yankees are judacious, and when they get to Little Round Top, they're even more anxious because they're not going to be driven from their position.
Yeah, well, that leads right into my next question, because in the movie, it does focus mostly on like Chamberlain's men there on, and after they hold the line, it shifts to the Confederate side where we see rather defeated looking General Longstreet talking to a badly wounded General Hood, who says it was the worst ground and laments that they couldn't have gone to the right like he asked to do. Things don't really seem to have gone well for the Confederates, and Longstreet tells Lee that it wasn't close, although Lee still seems to think that they won the day. But based on what you're saying too, like if it didn't really even start the advance until 4 p.m., can you share what else was going on in that time, the second day of fighting, that we don't even see in the movie?
Well, the Federals fortified the hill that the rebels didn't take at the end of the first day, Cemetery Hill. And they also fortify a hill right next to it, Culp's Hill. And there's fighting for the possession of these 2 heights, but the rebels do not prevail. Hood's division is its troops are the ones that are involved in the Little Round Top fight. Longstreet's other division, McLaw's division, and a supporting division from the 3rd Corps, Anderson's division, they chew up Sickles' troops in the peach orchard and the wheat field. Another Union Corps gets chopped up. So the 1st and the 11th Corps got chopped up on the first day. The 3rd gets chopped up on the second day. And the rebels come close to getting into Cemetery Ridge. Some say they came close to breaching the Union position there. But Hancock, who is with his 2nd Corps, which is lined up south of Cemetery Hill, they're on Cemetery Ridge, he's feeding brigades into this fight when he sees the rebels are close to making a breakthrough and delaying the rebels. Eventually, the rebels run out of steam, although he suffers some heavy casualties among his units doing that. So, yeah, it's uncomfortably close in front of Cemetery Ridge. Um, South of that, though, the Federals, the Fifth Corps does come up and helps to fill in the line that the Third Corps had abandoned when it moved out to the peach orchard. And Meade's largest corps, the Sixth Corps, comes up, and he keeps that in reserve. He doesn't need to commit that to combat. Well, one brigade, I think, gets set up to Culp's Hill, but most of it is there waiting in case there's a real emergency. So Longstreet's overall assessment is, federal line is still intact. The rebels had their moments of glory, but his two divisions get chopped up too in the process. They suffer heavy casualties. They're pretty worn out. That's why they're not going to participate in the big assault that Lee entrusts to Longstreet's care the following day, July 3rd. There are some historians who say that by the end of the second day, the battle had been decided. The Confederates could not win. So that's the opinion of some, and if you look at the situation, I mean, Lee's army has been torn up, and Meade is still holding strong positions. And as I say, he's got this Sixth Corps that hasn't really been blooded. A couple others on his right flank that are in pretty good shape as well.
You mentioned the third day, and the third day is the final day of the battle. Of course, they may not have known it exactly going into it yet, but according to the movie, General Lee orders General Longstreet to have General Pickett go to the center and split the Federal positions in half. Longstreet doesn't like this idea. It reminds Lee that the two divisions under his command, as you were just saying, they're at like 50% strength, he says, from the day before. So they need rest. Also, there's two Federal Corps in the rocks to the right of the hill. So if they attack in the center, they're going to be in the open, being attacked from fortified positions and artillery. And Lee says that they'll break in the center because they've been fighting on the left and the right for the past couple of days. So those have been reinforced. That means the weak point is in the center. So he goes on to tell Longstreet that retreating now means the past 2 days would have been for nothing. Richmond has no more soldiers to offer. So this is basically it. A little later, Lee gives Longstreet 3 divisions, including a fresh General Pickett, nearly 15,000 soldiers concentrated at the center, where Lee estimates there's only 5,000 Union soldiers. Longstreet flat out tells Lee that he thinks the attack is going to fail, but Lee says that everything is at stake, so it cannot fail. Was that the plan going into the third day of fighting?
Again, it's a little melodramatic. I mean, Lee wants to win. And what you say, what the movie says, is basically correct. He feels that Meade has reinforced his left and his right, and so the center is thin, and he can punch through there. And Pickett's division is fresh, about 5,000 guys there. Virginians, and Lee, of course, is partial to Virginians. Counts on them to do great things. And then 2 divisions that had fought from A.P. Hill's Corps on the first day, Harry Heath's division, although Harry Heath got hit by a spent ball on the first day's fighting. You may recall the actor playing Harry Heath has a white bandage under his hat. He was probably lying on his back somewhere in real life. Would say, "General Lee, the boys got their hand up. I couldn't restrain them." But J.J. Pettigrew is going to command his division, and two other brigades from one of A.P. Hill's division, entrusted to General Isaac Trimble, who was traveling with the army with no command. He was just there. He's available. Okay, we need a general officer to lead this echelon here, and so he'll be part of this mix as well. But Lee is acting on a hunch, and he's acted on instinct before. Well, commanders often do that. You try to be as well informed as possible, but there's certain educated guesswork that goes into making decisions on battlefields, making decisions in military campaigns. And Lee thinks, okay, this is it. Maybe he wants it too badly. The movie makes it seem that way. Martin Sheen's Robert E. Lee, there's a mystical quality to him. He's not just religious, but it's kind of like he feels that he has a vision that's inspired by God, that he can see certain things. It's the movie and the novel's way of trying to explain his genius for making smart tactical decisions. And he's in the center, they will break. Like he could see it happening. So I mean, it's an interesting take, and I'm not going to dispute that. Lee certainly believed that it would break. How, for whatever reason, he made that decision. But yeah, he's hoping against. The thing about this, it's a frontal assault. It's not a flank assault, and it's troops moving across ostensibly open ground, and Union artillery, which is positioned pretty much along, positioned along the most of that line from Cemetery Hill to Little Round Top. They're within range, and they can see the Confederate troops that will be launching that attack. So yeah, you can expect a pretty stiff reaction if you send troops over that ground. But on the other hand, it's not as suicidal as someone just looking at a map might think. I lead the annual staff ride for Temple's Army ROTC program to Gettysburg, and so we've walked the route of Pickett's charge. And I read some battlefield guides before doing this, and one by Carol Reardon, a professor emerita at Penn State, which is especially good. She says, when you walk in Pickett's charge, ask yourself, what can I see? What can't I see? Who can see me? Who can't see me? Because the ground undulates. It's not just a flat plane. It undulates. You come up and then you go down, and the people along that stone wall, they can't see you. Someone off to your flank might be able to see you while you're in a certain patch. Then you come up and you go down. The Confederates, when they were advancing, especially Pickett's troops, they just didn't go straight ahead. They obliqued to the left. And they would more or less maneuver to try to stay under covered ground as long as possible. It's not till the Confederates get to the road with the fences on either side, those two stout fences that they have to try to climb over, they just can't throw down. That's where they're visible to all the Federals in front of them. That's where the Union artillery in front of them can start wailing them with canister. And the Union infantry, they're within rifle musket range. And that's where they really start taking the heavy losses. But the idea is, we just move forward, and when we get close enough, we run. We don't stop and exchange fire with troops under cover, and we just try to bowl them over. And if their line is thin there, we can do it.
In the movie, we do see the main attack on the third day, and before the fight, Longstreet predicts what's going to happen. He says it's a mathematical equation that most will die, but he's been ordered to carry out the attack. And we see the way this happens in the movie, the artillery on the Confederate side kick it off. They have a heavy barrage on Union positions to try to break them up. And then the artillery is actually running low on ammunition. We talked about supply before, and Longstreet decides to order the attack earlier than the movie makes it seem like he didn't want to attack as fast as he had to because the artillery is starting to run low on ammunition. And then the movie focuses a lot on General Lewis Armistead, although he's under the command of General George Pickett, who is tasked with leading his division across the field towards the center of the Union positions. Kind of starts as a slow march. The infantry makes their way past the Confederate artillery positions, and you continue marching into an open field. The movie mentions them being out in the open for, I think, like a mile in range of artillery and muskets alike. And we kind of talked a little bit about that. But the way that it's depicted in the movie, it doesn't really seem to be too much of a surprise when Pickett's march forward turns into essentially a slaughter. And that's what we see. Union artillery fires on them for a while before the Confederate soldiers get closer under fire, Union infantry starts firing on them. Then many of them are firing from an elevated position or under the cover of a stone wall we see there. But there are so many Confederates that it still seems like a large number of them make their way to the wall where the Union artillery is, and then turns into like close range bayonet. We have all these different types of fighting, hand-to-hand combat. The Confederate generals Lee, Longstreet, and some of the others are watching this fighting from the distance. We see this in the movie, and we see the different flags flying into fighting, and then one Confederate flag goes down, another one goes down, and then all of a sudden there's no more Confederate flags flying. It just seems like it's a total victory for the Union Army. Is that a pretty good interpretation of what really happened?
It's not bad. Lee intended the artillery barrage to drive away the Union artillery, which would take weapons that could be converted into powerful anti-personnel weapons with canister cans with metal balls, about 90 of them, the size of golf balls, convert a cannon into a giant shotgun. But he wanted to drive away the Union artillery, which would make things easier for his infantry, keep their casualties down. The Confederate artillery, they're out in front, so they're within range of the Union artillery too. They receive counter battery fire, so they only bring out so much ammunition to supply the guns. They keep their main ammunition train back a bit so it doesn't get blown up. They blow up one line reaction, but they shoot away the artillery that's in their limbers up front with their guns, and the commander of the artillery tells Longstreet, "Look, I'm running out of ammunition." He had a dual mission. It was not just to drive away the Union artillery, but the Confederate artillery was supposed to go forward and support the Confederate infantry, which doesn't happen. But he's telling Longstreet, I've done the best I can. Some of the guns have been driven away. New guns have come up. He feels like Sisyphus. But if you're going to go, you got to go now. Or, we won't be able to carry out the second part of our mission. And Longstreet, his diffidence is obvious. I mean, he's sitting on a rail fence, and Pickett comes up to him and says, "Should I go in?" And Longstreet doesn't say, "Yeah, give him hell." He just kind of bows his head and waves his hand as if in assent, and the Confederates take off. It's just like he just can't actually say the words, and that is a telling moment. I mean, that conveys the fact that he thinks that this is a suicide mission, but he's under orders. Lewis Armistead, of course, he's useful in a number of ways. He commands one of Pickett's 3 divisions. When Pickett begins his attack, he has not divisions, brigades. He commands one of Pickett's 3 brigades. When Pickett begins his attack, he has 2 brigades out front, Dick Garnett on the left and Kemper on the right. Armistead's coming up kind of in the second line, so his brigade doesn't absorb a lot of the casualties that some of the others do during the initial approach. But, he's also an emotional device, helping to capture the traditional brother versus brother vision of the Civil War. I mean, a lot of the senior commanders here have been through West Point, and they had Northern friends, they had Southern friends, but when the Union breaks up, most of them go with their native states and end up trying to kill each other, at least destroy each other's military units. And so the agony that some of these fellows felt is exemplified, especially in the Armistead and Hancock relationship. They were best buds before the war. But as the front of Pickett's division is getting shredded, and to make things worse, as the Confederates draw near on their right, a brigade of Vermont troops come out and flank, firing into their right flank. They come from, there are no rebels in front of them, so they come out from behind the stone wall, and they're pouring fire into Kemper's brigade. And on the other side, where the 2 divisions from A.P. Hill's Corps was involved. The 8th Ohio Infantry does the same thing. So it's not just cannons in front of them and cannons to the right and left of them, but infantry pretty close to the right and left, firing into them, tearing them up as they're making that final approach from the Emmitsburg Road. So it may not have looked like a trap in the beginning, and some of that was optimistic thinking. But it certainly becomes one, and part of that is because subordinate federal commanders flank the rebel assault force and make their lives even more miserable, and for many of them, short.
You mentioned with Armistead and Hancock, and we do see that very, very prominently displayed in the movie. And I wanted to ask about that because it does seem to add to either the drama or the controversial aspect of the battle in the movie, because it is a civil war. And so with the Armistead and Hancock relationship, there's a really emotional aspect of Armistead recounting this story, the last night he was with his friends before they broke up, somewhat north, somewhat south. And the Battle of Gettysburg seems to be the first time that Armistead is facing off with Hancock on the, either sides of the battlefield. And there's almost seems to be some reluctance on Armistead's side to going into battle because he knows his friend is going to be on the other side. He ends up doing it anyway, of course. But do we know of any reluctance to fight because of this, what we see in the Civil War, brother against brother? It's not really a true enemy as they would see.
I don't know about reluctance. I mean, there's stories about the Armistead-Hancock relationship that, man, if I ever turn my hand against you, may God strike me dead. So if he actually said that, that's in his mind as he's going up against Hancock's Second Corps. There were other networks that connected men on different sides during the fighting, and Armistead figures in that as well. Armistead was a Mason. Many 19th century gentlemen were Masons. And when he was hit, according to one story, he gave the Masonic sign. They had secret handshakes and certain signals, kind of like urban gangs today, but maybe Masons would take umbrage at that comparison. But supposedly he gave the sign of Masonic distress, and a Union officer who was a Mason hastened to his side to succor him, to give him a drink from a canteen, to try to make him comfortable, etc. And that's where he supposedly, asked about Hancock and learned that Hancock had been wounded, and expressed regret, according to at least one Northern account. Tell him I'm sorry, as if he was apologizing for being a Confederate. But that vignette of the stricken Armistead and his Northern Masonic brother, one of the last monuments to go up at Gettysburg, depicts that, and it's off Cemetery Ridge, but it was funded by the Masons. So the brother against brother theme is still alive and well, even though a lot of us have grown less sentimental about the Civil War. People being hesitant to fight because they knew there was a friend on the other side. I've worked a lot on George Custer in the Civil War, and all his roommates but one at West Point were Southerners. He preferred their company. He was a Democrat, and so that was the pro-Southern party. And he had friends that were fought for the Confederacy. In the Peninsula in 1862, he, in fact, one of his Confederate classmates was wounded and then paroled and got married at Williamsburg. And Custer was the best man. Gibbon Lee invited him to be the best man. He's there mixing with all these secessionists, including young women, saying, I'll look on you favorably if you join our side. Lieutenant Custer, Captain Custer, I forget what he was at the time. Custer's best friend at West Point, Thomas Lafayette Rosser, who was a Confederate cavalryman, they will square off against each other in certain battles. In one fight, Trevelyan Station, Rosser, the Confederates overran Custer's baggage train, and they captured Custer's personal wagon, which had a brand new dress brigadier general's coat in it. And Rosser sent him a note through the lines. Rosser was a bigger man than Custer, but he thanked him for the coat. But he said, next time, please tell your tailor to take it out in the shoulders. And later in the war, Trevilian Station was in June. In October, Custer turned the tables on Rosser and routed Rosser and captured his baggage train and captured one of his coats. In fact, it's preserved at West Point. Custer's widow would present it to the U.S. Military Academy kind of as a symbol of that brother against brother motif. But Custer will send Rosser a note and say, tell your tailor to bring it in. So, and George Pickett was a classmate of Ulysses S. Grant. They talk about Pickett being newly married. He'll have a baby born to him during the siege of Petersburg. And Grant will order his artillery to fire a salute. And if I recall this correctly, some of Pickett's other buddies on the Union side will subscribe and send a silver set. When babies are born, christening sets, silver cups and things. They'll send that across the lines to Pickett. So you see those expressions of fellowship at times during the war, but I don't recall anybody. I know Hancock never held back from attacking a Confederate force, and Armistead doesn't either. I mean, Armistead does his duty. He's the only Confederate brigade commander to get over the Union wall. So this guy is hell for leather, as they say.
But something else that other than the brother versus brother, I think a lot of people think that the American Civil War was a war to free the slaves. And that's something that we see talked about at different times throughout this movie too. One scene I think sums it up best when Lieutenant Thomas Chamberlain is talking to a Confederate prisoner about why they're fighting. Chamberlain says that he's fighting to free the slaves and preserve the Union. The Confederate soldier says he doesn't care about the slaves. He's fighting for his rights to live however he wants to.
Or rats.
Rats. Yeah. No, you're right. I'm not good with the accents.
It's a nice touch. It's a really nice touch of the movie.
It is.
I love that.
That is great. Yeah. There's a scene right after that though, where Thomas Chamberlain and is talking with his brother it's Joshua Chamberlain. Thomas Chamberlain's brother is talking with a Sergeant Kilrain there about their views on race. And Buster says, you can't judge a race. You can't judge a whole group of men at once. You have to take them one at a time. Chamberlain says that there was never a difference in his mind. So we get some inklings of the issue of slavery and race here in the battle too, between the different soldiers on either side. Do you think it did a good job of showing us the views on race among the average soldiers?
That's part of the movie that I'm the least happy with. There's no doubt that slavery caused the war. The 11 states that seceded in their ordinance of secession said the reason we're going out is because Yankees want to take slavery away from us. It was the main bone of contention between the North and South. There were others, but in the 30 years leading up to the war, the North finally came down to this position. We don't want the South to become stronger politically. They already have an advantage. They can count 2/3 of their slaves for representation, even though those people can't vote. Gives them more seats in the House of Representatives, gives them more votes in the Electoral College, and we're sick and tired of that. And we don't want any more Southern states, any more slave states. Southerners were insulted by that. Who are you to say how we should live and where our lifestyle should spread, etc. And they were convinced the only reason the Yankees want to do this is that they want to take slavery from us. And we're not going to let them get away with that. And it wasn't just a matter of regional pride. Part of the price that white America paid for having slavery was psychological. In order to rationalize a living with a system that was based on force and cruelty, they convinced themselves, well, these people that have been kidnapped from Africa are better off because they're being exposed to Christianity, and we're giving them something productive to do, as if they weren't doing productive things back home in Africa, where they had cities and even universities, and people were learning to read the Quran, etc. But so we're benefiting them, uh, uh, but at the same time, because of their African background, they are inherently savage. If we don't keep them under control, they will rise up against the white race, and we will have a race war, and either the whites will exterminate the blacks will exterminate the whites. Thomas Jefferson, who agonized over slavery, will end up coming to that conclusion, saying we cannot end slavery because we have the wolf by the ears. The wolf by the ears. Picture that. If you pick up a wolf, you don't let go, because Wolfie will tear out your throat. So even white Southerners who didn't own slaves feared emancipation. They thought that there would be race war, and so when Northerners say we want to free the slaves, they didn't think, well, they're just a bunch of namby-pamby do-gooders. They want to get us killed, and they'd even sent people down south to do that. John Brown seizes a federal arsenal, 1859 at Harper's Ferry, to give guns to blacks. This is one time when the white South is for gun control. But to give guns to blacks to turn on us, and those people, they'll kill men, women, and children, etc. It doesn't happen. Well, it did once with Nat Turner's revolt in 1831. I guess one bad example is enough. When Lincoln arms blacks during the Civil War, they don't run amok. They pretty much follow military discipline. But what people believe is true is more powerful than what is actually true. So, this thing about slavery, it's more than just an academic discussion or a matter of economics. There's a lot of emotion tied up there. Lee's men, when they came north, besides helping themselves to the larders and the apple cellars and the smokehouses of South Central Pennsylvania, if they found any free blacks, they apprehended them and sent them back to the South as slaves, which is, you don't see that in the movie. There's one black person in the film, and he doesn't say anything. He's like, okay, he has no voice. So Chamberlain and Buster Kilrain get philosophical. It's an interesting argument. It would have been interesting if Chamberlain said to Kilrain, he says, I take one man at a time. How do you feel about the English? But it reflects the times in which the novel was written. For coming out of the Civil War, by the beginning of the 20th century, history had been rewritten for the general American public in order for the white North and the white South to get along. We agree both sides were brave, both sides were noble, both sides fought for their beloved cause. As for slavery and blacks, we're just going to kind of erase them from the picture. Yeah, Lincoln frees the slaves, good. Let's get back to Robert E. Lee and these other noble fellows sacrificing themselves for what they believe, and that's still part of American culture, popular culture. When Shaw writes The Killer Angels, and still part of the popular culture when they make the movie. There are no real bad guys in this movie, are there? They're all good guys. They're all good guys. They're all giving their best for their cause. And at the same time, most white Northerners didn't go to war just to free the slaves either. The white North was pretty much as racist as the white South, I would say. There are exceptions. The abolitionists, etc. Some were less bigoted than others. But as the war goes on, and as casualties mount, there's this growing sentiment in the North that we've got to hurt the Confederacy any way we can. And all these white men off to war, the black population is bearing a disproportionate burden of the labor in the South, keeping the Confederate economy alive. Well, if somehow we can get those people off the plantations, somehow we can get them to run away, that is going to weaken the Confederacy. And Yeah, it's an extreme measure because the American way was based on the protection of private property. It was guaranteed by the Constitution. But these people are rebels. These people are traitors. These people caused this war. They deserve it. They deserve it. At the same time, there's a growing sentimentality. A lot of Northerners didn't have much contact with blacks, didn't really know what slavery was like. And when they get south, they get a taste of those terrors. I mean, some photographers took pictures of the scarred backs of black men who had been flogged, and that's being sent north. So there's this growing sympathy for blacks. Doesn't last much beyond the war, but slavery is a bigger factor in all this, but it is complicated and hard to depict in a movie that's trying to cover such a big battle. But they take their nod to it. New Englanders like the Chamberlains may have been more inclined to support abolition, emancipation than their Irish neighbors who are competing with free blacks for jobs, things like that.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like just you mentioned just the one. I think it was a runaway slave. They just call him a John Henry because he doesn't talk. They don't even know his name. Plays such a minor role in the movie, which granted the movie is not specifically, I mean, it is about the battle itself, but it sounds like that even in and of itself, the way the movie portrayed that is almost historically accurate to the general sentiment of how people, especially sounds like, after the war, just kind of wanted to wash some of that away and hide it, almost not talk about it.
Ordinary Confederate soldiers, they were fighting for their families because they were afraid if there's a new racial order, they're going to be on a losing end one way or another. That's one reason why Confederate veterans will turn to political terrorism after the war when the Republicans start setting up state governments that are supported by the black vote. They don't want blacks to have any kind of power, and they will end up, according to one historian, killing an estimated 50,000 politically active blacks.
Wow.
During the Reconstruction era to take back control of their home states. So it's again, we sanitize a lot of the aspects of our Civil War, but the savagery just didn't occur on the battlefield.
Yeah. Fear is a powerful motivator too.
Yes,
that's for sure. Yeah. Earlier, I had asked about what the thought was before the battle, and the movie does talk about how the balance of the war rested on the outcome of the battle, and we talked about people even might have thought that beforehand, at least according to the movie. But at the very end of the movie, after the battle, the Union won. General Lee realizes that the Confederacy is lost, and he needs to focus on getting as many survivors as he can out of there alive. But with the battle over, the movie ends. So can you fill in some more historical context around the aftermath of the Battle of Gettysburg and its impact on the Civil War overall?
Well, it was important. It was big. It checked Lee's second invasion of the North. They convey the impression that Lee's invincible, but that they neglect politely to mention Antietam. He got his army chopped up and had to retreat back into Virginia. Gettysburg is an even bigger disaster as far as that's concerned. He lost just under 1/3 of his troops, killed, wounded, and missing, 32.4%. So, his army is in bad shape. He shot away a lot of his artillery ammunition. He really can't afford to fight another major engagement until he gets resupplied. So he has to get out of there. He stands fast on the 4th of July. What he does is that his troops curled around Gettysburg. His line was like an upside down fish hook too, on Seminary Ridge, facing Cemetery Ridge, and then going north around the town of Gettysburg, curving around Cemetery Hill and Culp's Hill. What he'll do is he'll straighten his line. He'll pull everybody back to Seminary Ridge, and it's almost as if he's hoping Meade will come across that open ground and try to clinch a decisive victories, just kind of wishing that Meade will attack him. But Meade doesn't do that, and Lee, realizes that his position is tenuous. So he'll start withdrawing his troops. He'll load those wounded who can be moved without killing them, at least killing them right away, into ambulances and wagons. And that convoy stretches for 17 miles. 17 miles of maimed men in vehicles with poor suspension system on dirt roads, jolting along. Eyewitnesses talked about, the screams of agony, oh, God have mercy, somebody kill me, things like that. But he'll send them kind of northwest and then around to get clear of the Federals. And then he'll start marching his troops south toward Maryland and the Potomac River, trying to keep a line of mountains between himself and the Federals. Meade spends a couple of days, he sends his cavalry out right away to find out what Lee's doing and to harass the Confederate retreat, to attack any detachment that might be exposed, try to fight your way through these passes to get an idea just how strongly posted Confederate troops are. His infantry's kind of held up for a couple of days, burying the dead and getting reorganized. He's lost a couple corps commanders, 3 at least. Reynolds is dead. Hancock is wounded. Sickles got hit by the Confederate artillery and had one of his legs amputated. So he's out of the war. But he has plenty of leisure to write articles saying how Meade botched things up, and he actually saved Meade by marching the Third Corps out to the peach orchard.
Ever the politician, huh?
Here it names a pistol. I mean, this guy, he fit very well in today's politics because no matter what dumb things he did, he was unapologetic. He was always right. He was a master of the big lie, and it worked for him. It works for some of those guys. Maybe you have to be from New York to pull that off. I hope my wife doesn't see this because she's from New York. So Meade will start, pursuing. He wants a decisive win. But, during the fighting at Gettysburg, when he ordered his troops there, he told his quartermaster, I want you to prioritize ammunition and hospital supplies. Food comes third. So his guys are hungry and they need to be fed before they can begin this pursuit. That's another reason why they delay. Soldiers aren't supermen. And if you push them too hard, then they're going to start dropping. You need a lot of calories to sustain just marching. So he starts moving down, but while Lee is behind this chain of mountains, he thinks that trying to fight your way through these gaps is just like, trying to go through a bottleneck. The enemy on the other side lined up, and they'll gun your guys down before you can deploy them in ample strength. It'll be foolhardy. It'll be a massacre. So Lee's racing to the river, and he'll get there first, but it rained heavily after the Battle of Gettysburg. And when Lee gets to the Potomac, it's flooded. So he has to dig in and try to put a pontoon bridge across. And that takes several days. So Meade lines up, and he's trying to figure out where Lee's line is weak and try to launch an attack. And by the time he's ready to do it, Meade gets most of his army across the Army of the Potomac. The rear guard at Falling Waters gets chopped up. George Custer and other Union cavalrymen get in there. Pettigrew, who commanded one of the divisions in Pickett's charge, is mortally wounded by one of Custer's troopers. So they pick up 1,000 or more prisoners. But Lee gets his army across the Potomac. Lee manages to escape. Lincoln is disgusted. His private secretary, we call him, saying, I'm paraphrasing, but we had them, we had them on our hand. All we had to do was close it, and nothing I could say would get the army to move. Now he's watching this from his desk in Washington. He doesn't appreciate Meade's problems, but he's just heartbroken because It's not the end. It's not the turning point. The war's going to go on for nearly 2 more years. Confederates have been hurt, but in the following year, that will be the bloodiest year in the war. As Ulysses S. Grant keeps trying to find his way through various defensive positions that Lee occupies at the Wilderness and Spotsylvania Courthouse at Cold Harbor. And he forces Lee back, and both the opposing armies kind of lose half their strength during the first 6 weeks of that campaign, and the Confederates have fewer reserves than the Union does. But the bloodletting, I mean, everyone thought that Grant, after he took Vicksburg, that he was the miracle maker who would just come east and win the war with one more battle. And Northerners are getting disgusted, and war weariness is at its height. And Lincoln, in the summer of 1964, despairs of being reelected. He draws up a secret plan, tells his cabinet about it, but he puts it in a sealed envelope of what he will have to do if he is voted out of office in November to win the war before the next president is inaugurated in March. So Lee is not finished. His capacity has been reduced, but he is still dangerous. And it's not just a matter of winning battles. It's a matter of sustaining the will to win, and who's willing to pay the price to attain victory.
In there, you mentioned too, Lee's kind of feeling of being invincible. We talked earlier about the way the movie portrays it, kind of this mystical type thing. But in the movie, there was a line of dialogue from General Lee in the last day of the battle where he says that he has, I think he says, never yet left the enemy in command of the field. And basically the idea that we're always going to win. The impression I got from that was there's almost this element of pride to Lee's orders, particularly to attack the center on the third day. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I mean, there's an honor code that permeates the command echelons. So many of them are graduates of West Point, duty, honor, country. And it's a point of honor, to hang tough. You want to win, not just for your own self-esteem, but also for the troops, because you're asking them to make these sacrifices. And, we go in there the first day and we kick a lot of Yankee butt. And, this isn't, I don't particularly like this terrain here, so we're going to leave. And the mayor said, what were we fighting and dying for? We had him on the run. We could do it again. It's not just Lee thinks himself invincible. It's his men. Arthur Freeman, the English military observer, said that Lee's troops going into Pennsylvania, that they harbored a pretty hearty contempt for an enemy that they had beaten time and time again. Everyone's conveniently forgetting Antietam, but elsewhere, I mean, Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville kind of blot out that unhappy memory. Yeah, that was just a bad day, but a fair fight, or not even a fair fight. We're outnumbered 3-2. We can take them. That kind of thing.
You mentioned Freeman. I was going to ask about him too. In the movie, he's an emissary of Queen Victoria. His role in the movie kind of sounds like almost a liaison of sorts between the British and the Confederacy. Were the British actually supporting the Confederacy during the war?
Well, let's deal with Fremantle first. He is not an emissary of the Queen or the British ministry or anything like that. He is a captain and lieutenant colonel in the Coldstream Guards. Now, the British Guards were kind of set apart from the rest of the army. In the Guards, in his regiment, he was a captain, a company commander. But if he stepped out of the Guards and encountered officers from regular line regiments, he is Lieutenant Colonel Freeman. There's this dual rank system, double standard, which set the Guards apart and above. But he, there's this war going on in North America, and it seems kind of interesting, and there may be some new developments involved. So he is able to obtain a lead, and he's more a military tourist. The movie's right. He has to sneak through the blockade and land in Texas. And he travels overland through Texas. He keeps a diary. And so he meets all these great, bizarre frontier characters. He's kind of like a precursor for Little Big Man, which I
was going to
really,
say.
Cutthroat frontiersmen, people have been flayed alive because they committed a crime, etc. And he goes to Louisiana and meets the characters there, and then crosses the Mississippi, which is kind of dangerous because Union gunboats are patrolling it, and travels across the rest of the South because he wants to link up with Lee's army. That's where the action is. He wants to see it on campaign. Originally, he was neutral. But he received such a warm reception from Southerners, white Southerners, many of whom, especially plantation owners, tried to ape the manners of the English nobility. They in some of the nasty literature exchange before the war, they'd say, we're descended from the Cavaliers who followed Charles II. Whereas the Yankees are those nasty Puritans always judging people, kind of thing. So an English guards officer, everyone's throwing parties for this guy. And glad to meet him. But yeah, he's not there to report back to the British Army or anything. Although he will take his diary and he will publish it. A year later when he gets back to England. It's a big hit. And it's a great primary source of the state of the South and the Gettysburg campaign. He overhears certain conversations, etc. He does not parade around the Gettysburg battlefield dressed in the uniform of the Coldstream Guards. He does not wear a red coat because he is not acting in an official capacity. He would have gotten in trouble for that. He was wearing what he called a hunting jacket. I think it was gray or something. In the first scene that he appears in, where he's at the campfire meeting Pickett and the officers of Pickett's division. That's what Arthur Freemantle wore during his American travels. But his text is an important source for Shara, and he's a character in the novel, and of course he's a character in the movie.
Yeah, it's an interesting twist that they did to make him seem a little bit more important than he probably was.
There were military observers from different countries that came. There was one from Germany who dismissed the American Civil War as a clash of mobs. Well, there's nothing to be learned from that. And we sent military observers to observe the Franco-Prussian War. General Phil Sheridan observed it, and when he got back to America, he supposedly told Custer, was a buddy of his, Custer, if I had you and your 3rd Cavalry Division, which Custer commanded at the end of the Civil War, with me, we could have captured the Prussian Crown Prince 3 times over, that kind of thing. So military men could form low judgments of their peers and other armies. It's a two-way street.
Going back to some of that invincibility that we see Lee having.
Invincibility. You want a commander who's confident.
Right.
How are we going to do? I don't know.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Try it and see what happens. No, he was somebody who's confident.
Somebody who always has the answers. I mean, yeah.
Got to project that to your troops. Command presence, it's called. And Lee had that. Even though he was in his 50s, he was the old man, as Armistead called him in one scene. And I'm sure a lot of troops saw him his age, always in their teens and early 20s. But he was still fit, could ride a horse. He still looks impressive in his photographs. If people can get by the, kind of the current low opinion of Lee because he fought for the Confederacy and fought for slavery. He projected a certain presence that elicited the devotion of his troops. One of the big best-selling novels that came out during the war by Victor Hugo, Les Miserables. Jean Valjean and all that. Copies probably pirated got to the CSA, got to the Confederate States, also the North, translated into English. And Lee's men, they were so devoted to him that, like a lot of Americans, they mispronounced the title of the book. Lee's Miserables. And they called themselves Lee's Miserables. Yeah, we suffer what we suffer for him. We believe in him. And that is a devotion that transcended more than a century. There is an unscripted scene in this movie where Martin Sheen, in makeup and costume as Lee, on a gray horse, the movie version of Traveler, comes riding out, and the Confederate armies assemble. I don't know when this was shot. I assume it was probably just before Pickett's Charge, because a lot of Rebs together. They see him and they go nuts. They forget that he's this liberal activist. All they see is Lee, and they gather around him cheering. And get some close-up shots of Sheen, and it looks at first he's scared out of his mind. Are they going to lynch me? But they're just, there's this fusion of emotion, and they're waving at him, and they've got their caps and hats on their rifles, and they're, pumping them up and down, and they end up going, Lee, 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 which was not a Civil War cheer. It's more like USA, USA, USA. If Sheen wanted to improvise and say, okay, boys, let's take Washington, they would have followed him down the road to D.C. And it's our culture has changed. You'll never see that in the movie again, I think. And you may never get that many Confederate reenactors together again to stage that kind of demonstration. But it testifies to the Lee mystique.
Yeah, yeah. Well, throughout the movie, there are a lot of things that, as I was watching, it just made me question how things might have been different if they went according to plan or went differently. Are you open to doing maybe a few what if scenarios from the movie?
I'll stick my neck out, sure.
Well, the first what if revolves around the Confederate General Stuart. In the movie, he arrives at the Confederate camp just before the final day and generally scolds him for not sending any word. According to the dialogue in the movie, Lee says Stuart's cavalry are the eyes of the army, and because he wasn't there, that meant the entire army was blind for the first 2 days of the battle. What would have happened differently if General Stuart had been there for the entire battle?
Yeah, it would have been interesting. I mean, Lee actually called Stuart my eyes, and it's too bad that he wasn't able to use the cavalry yet to take Stuart's place. But the Army of Northern Virginia would have had a better idea what was in front of it. And Lee wouldn't have said to his commanders, well, we're going to converge, we're going to concentrate. Don't bring on a general engagement. Just feel your way and don't get into big trouble. He would have had more concrete orders for these guys. He would have said, stop at Cashtown and wait for Early to get to Hanover or something like Early and Ewell to get to Hanover. And then we'll do a bit more scouting and decide what our next move will be. So he may not have blundered into that battle as he did. Whether that would have altered the outcome or not, could have. They could have. Maybe he would have, once he got an idea of what the terrain was like in and around Gettysburg, he might have pleased Longstreet by saying, no, this isn't the place to fight. We're going to maybe angle off to the east a bit more and see if we can draw the Federals into this territory here or that territory there. So there may have been a lot more maneuvering before those two armies clashed.
It's interesting that you mentioned that there was he did have cavalry, just didn't. It wasn't under Stuart, so he didn't use it as much. Whereas in the movie, it makes it seem like there was absolutely no cavalry whatsoever. So it was much more emphasized how important it was to have the eyes there.
And it's easy to say, well, they left this out, they left that out. Yeah. But when you're doing a movie, you've got to leave certain things out. You'll be in a 6-hour production, the wretched version of War and Peace. I don't know.
A real-time 3-day movie.
Theaters would have been wiped out from popcorn and robotic foraging through A&Ps and stuff like that. Okay, Lee doesn't have his cavalry and is operating blind. They make the point. That's the main point.
The next what if scenario that I want to ask you about happens during the first day of battle. The Confederate General Trimble tells General Lee that his commanding officer, General Ewell, refused to let Trimble take a hill that overlooks the town, even though it was empty at the time. And at the end of the first day, we see a scene in the movie where Ewell says he didn't think it was practical to take the hill, and General Rhodes apologizes to Lee for not taking that hill. The movie makes it seem like this was a big blunder because they talk about how the federal troops are digging in overnight and it'll be a strong position for the Union the next day. What do you think would have been different if the Confederates had taken the hill that first day?
If they had taken Cemetery Hill, it would have compromised the position that Meade held during the battle. They would have been on the north flank of that upside-down fishhook position. So Meade, I don't know, could have formed a new line, anchored on Little Round Top facing north, or moved even further away. But there wouldn't have been a lot of the Battle of Gettysburg at Gettysburg. What happened on the second and the third would have been very different. Maybe Meade could have caught. Let me rephrase. Maybe Lee could have caught Meade on the road or something like that. Although I don't think Meade would have been that careless. But it would have been a very different kind of situation. How much of a fight would have raged in that vicinity? Well, that's anybody's guess.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how something like that can affect. That will have the butterfly effect, right? Of everything changing from that.
Yeah, we talk a lot about the forces of history, and we're swept along by forces greater than our individual efforts. But I think there's also room for contingency in history. Individual decisions make a difference. Strong Vincent putting his brigade on Little Round Top. Lawrence Chamberlain would not have become a hero unless Vincent put him where he was. And Lawrence Chamberlain wouldn't have been as big a hero, I think, as he is if he had not survived the battle and written up his exploits and given numerous speeches about his exploits. Strong Vincent is mortally wounded. So, he can't be celebrated as the Lion of the Round Top because, well, he's gone. We got to find somebody else. And it wasn't just the bayonet charge on the left by the 20th Maine that saved that position. When the Confederates first attacked Little Round Top, ends up 3 Alabama regiments will end up squaring off against most of Vincent's brigade, 2 against Chamberlain's 20th Maine. But 2 Texas regiments from a splintered brigade that bypassed Devil's Den will come up against Vincent's right flank, and that's rockier ground, steeper ground. But they're able to start pushing the 16th Michigan back. And at the last minute, another regiment, by this time, Warren, he's not sending proxies. He's off on his horse, trying to grab other Union troops to come up to Little Round Top. And a leading regiment in another brigade that he grabbed, the 140th New York, commanded by Colonel Patrick H. Patty O'Rourke, graduated first in the West Point class in June 1861, the class in which Custer was last. Irish Catholic immigrant. These are people who, the Anglo-Saxon establishment looked down on, but this guy's so talented, so charming, so good. He's class president. And he's commanding this regiment, and he gets up there and he sees the Rebs and he just yells at his men, "Charge!" They go rushing in. He gets hit in the neck by a bullet that kills him almost instantly. So Patty O'Rourke doesn't get to write up his exploits. And he probably would have become a general officer too. He would have become even more prominent after Gettysburg. There's a monument to him. There's a bronze bas relief of his face on the monument of his regiment. It's at eye level. People who pass it rub his nose. And that's the shiniest part of the monument. Park Service doesn't want you to shine his nose. But Patty O'Rourke is there where he fell. I got into contingency. But there are other examples of that. Union battery commanders, regimental commanders, brigade commanders making decisions without their superiors' approval. That especially Union officers that shut the Confederates for a crucial period of time. So the Confederates would have. I think Meade could not have held the line that he held that shaped the Battle of Gettysburg.
That kind of leads then into the final what if scenario that I have. Is more from an overall perspective. We already talked about what actually happened, how the Battle of Gettysburg impacted the Civil War. But with some of these things in the movie that, if they had happened differently, then the impression that I got was that things very well could have gone the other way, and the Confederates could have come away from Gettysburg with a victory. What do you think would have happened different if the Confederacy had won at Gettysburg?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, this whole attitude, this could be the last battle. This could be the battle that makes a difference. It comes from William Faulkner. Michael Shara was an English professor. I'm sure he knew Faulkner, and in a book, I think it's called Absalom, My Absalom. Faulkner says that in the imagination of every Southern boy, it's a few minutes before 3 p.m. on July 3rd, and they're all thinking, what if this time we're able to carry that stone wall? What if this time we're able to win? Here's a Southern writer, writing in the early 20th century, 20s or 30s, and he's capturing this kind of collective mindset, and that has hung over Gettysburg ever since. The high water mark of the Confederacy. They came so close to cracking the line on Cemetery Ridge, and that would have made Gettysburg the turning point in favor of the Confederacy. Well, let's get down to brass tacks. As I said, Lee lost a third of his men at Gettysburg. If Pickett's charge had been a victory, he still would have lost that many or close to it. And lost a lot of horses, lost a lot of high-ranking officers. A lot of his corps commanders were killed, but some of his division commanders are disabled, like John Bell Hood. Shot away a lot of his artillery ammunition. The Army of the Potomac would not have been destroyed because Meade had that 6th Corps that he could have brought up to stabilize the line and cover a retreat. So they would have had to do it again. And I don't know if Lee would have had the strength to do it right away until he was resupplied. If he gave the Federals time to lick their wounds and bring up reinforcements and reserves from different parts of the North, I think it would have been tough going.
Could he have been resupplied? Because the movie mentions, I think, that there's a point where Lee says, Richmond doesn't have anybody else to send us. This is it.
Well, not troops. I'm thinking of artillery ammunition.
Okay.
That, Well, you really need your artillery to fight a battle. And the Yankees would have resupplied because they were closer to their depots, etc. But he would have been fighting with reduced numbers. But Meade would have too. Meade lost about 25% of his troops. But his losses were not as evenly distributed as Lee's. Some corps were chopped up, but some weren't so badly chopped up, and 6th Corps was pretty much intact. So that was his ace in the hole. But say Lee wins the spectacular victory and scatters the Army of the Potomac and marches to Washington. Again, he's got to fight his way through this ring of forts, some of which still stand, have been converted into parks, and say he fights his way through them. He's not going to have enough men to hold Washington. And, he's in an exposed position. The Federals can move around him, get between him and Virginia, etc. Well, the Union has naval superiority. They can steam up the Potomac and make his life tough. The Federals, with all their resources, it's going to take them 4 years of attrition to finally reduce Lee's army to such a shape that it can be encircled and captured at Appomattox. So I don't think 1863 was the time to score that kind of victory. Again, the psychological ramifications, that's another question. The political side of it, perhaps if they hurt the Yankees badly enough, if they forced Lee to retreat, Meade to retreat with heavy losses, and the Army of the Potomac is just not in condition to really react and pressure Lee. He's able to hang around Yankee territory for a while. Every day that passed would have eroded Northern support for the war.
Thank you for talking about the what ifs. I mean, that's obviously a lot of speculation. Obviously,
Other
when you're talking
people
about
would have different answers to that. So.
that. Well, it's fascinating because there were so many points throughout the movie where it made it seem like it could go completely the other way, which I know is, I mean, it happens a lot in war and in battles and stuff, and things can go the other way. So it is interesting with the amount that they put on this battle as being the turning tide of the war, and then all these things that could have turned this battle a different direction. It just kind of makes me wonder some of those what if scenarios, like if things had gone differently.
That's what posterity thinks. It was the turning point for the North, which simplifies things. I mean, it wasn't a walkover for the North after Gettysburg, but if the Confederates had won, then it would have been the turning point for them. The North would have cried uncle or whatever. The people who fought there wanted it to have meaning. So for Confederates to say, we got this close, it was within our grasp. It was just a matter of dumb luck or a fluke here, a fluke there. That doggone Stuart, he wasn't here. He was off glory riding. And then after Robert E. Lee dies and Longstreet starts airing his criticism of Lee, well, Longstreet threw the battle out of spite. Well, he wouldn't go along with Lee's plan. He wasn't a faithful subordinate. So he became vilified. These arguments would rage at Confederate reunions. And there's a story told that George Pickett was within earshot of one of these arguments, and they're going back and forth. And someone says, "Where's Pickett? Let's ask him." And they got his attention, and Pickett, probably the wittiest thing he ever said. I hope he actually said it. Well, I think the Yankees had something to do with it. Let's give them credit for fighting a good battle. But that's part of the fun of studying military history, especially, even professionals. The what ifs, what could have happened if things had gone one way, or someone made this decision instead of that decision. It's a judgment game. Everybody's a judge.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, thank you so much for coming on to chat about Gettysburg. For anyone who's wanting to learn more about the true story, where would you recommend that they start?
Stephen Sears, who wrote a number of best-selling books about different phases of the Civil War, a great biography of George McClellan, his book on Gettysburg is quite good. Alan Gelzo published a anniversary history of the battle in 2013. And I think it's called Gettysburg. A lot of these are just called Gettysburg, different authors, but that's well written and that's well done. He is a little less critical of Lee in some instances, like he'll say, Pickett's charge, couldn't Lee see that was suicidal? And Gelzo would point to some frontal attacks that, because of undulations in terrain, etc., succeeded, like the British attack on the Russians on the heights of the Alma during the Crimean War in October 1854. So he deviates from the conventional wisdom in some of his remarks. But new books on Gettysburg are coming out all the time. Some deal with the microhistory, Stuart's raid, Custer on the right flank on July 3rd, helping to stop Jeb Stuart. A number of books about Little Round Top and the 20th Maine. Books focusing on what Hancock did, what the Iron Brigade did, what the 26th North Carolina Confederate Regiment that really got shredded on the first day, what it did. So, start off with some of these general histories, and then go to Amazon.com and just put in Gettysburg and see what catches your fancy.
Yeah, I guess I didn't realize that Custer was there. I mean, obviously he's not in the movie at all, but he was actually at the Battle of Gettysburg, huh?
That's my main grief. No. He was on the Union right flank, the right end. And when Stuart gets in on July 2nd, Lee will send him with 4 brigades to go around the Union right around the same time that Pickett is attacking, or Pickett Longstreet is attacking the center. Pickett's charge is occurring. And that caused some people to say, yeah, Lee was planning a pincer's attack, and Pickett coming from the front, Stuart coming in from the rear. We're not quite sure what Stuart's mission was. It was certainly to distress the Federals, to distract the Federals, maybe to get into their supply trains. But Custer was there, and his division had been shifted to the south of Little Round Top to guard that flank. And he gets orders from his corps commander to report down there. And just at that time, Stuart makes his appearance. And the Union cavalry force that had been left in place is pretty weak. Its commander, David McMurtry Gregg, asks Custer to ignore his orders and stay. And Custer does so. And his brigade, it's a fairly new brigade, the Michigan Cavalry Brigade, will form the center of the Union line in fending off Stuart, and Custer will lead a climactic charge at the end that helps to check Stuart. There are other people that help Custer as well. He doesn't do it single-handed, as some Custer buffs like to purport. But that's where he's only been a brigadier general for a few days. He's one of Meade's first promotions, promoted from first lieutenant to brigadier general. But that's where he makes his mark. He does good. He made some mistakes earlier, but in that final charge, he does well, and that's where his rise to national prominence begins.
And I know you've written about Custer too, so I'll make sure to include a link to your books in the show notes for this episode as well.
I cover Custer at Gettysburg, as you can gather, but there are a number of fine books in Gettysburg that cover a bigger picture and even more important scenarios than the one involving Custer.
For sure. Well, thank you again so much for your time.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure.
This episode of Based on a True Story was produced by me, Dan Lefebvre. I'd like to thank Gregory J.W. Urwin for sharing his expertise about the historical accuracy of 1993's Gettysburg. If you want to dig even deeper into the true story, Gregory offered some great advice at the end there, or as I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, check out episode number 160 to learn more about Gettysburg. Or check out some of Gregory's books, like the one that he mentioned about Custer called Custer Victorious, The Civil War Battles of General George Armstrong Custer. Hop into the show notes for all those links. Or if you want to find them later, as always, everything's on the show's home on the web, based on a true story podcast.com/280. Okay, now it's time for the answer to our two truths and a lie game from the beginning of the episode. And as a quick refresher, here are the two truths and one lie again. Number 1, Pickett's charge happened on the third day of battle. Number 2, the Battle of Gettysburg was the final battle of the Civil War. Number 3, General Lee's men called themselves Lee's Miserables. Did you catch which one is a lie? We'll start with number 1. Pickett's charge happened on the third day of battle. That is true. As we learned, the movie was correct to show the offensive action led by one of the Confederate generals named George Pickett happening on the third day of the battle. It was the final major attack in the Battle of Gettysburg that basically sealed the outcome of the battle. That brings us to number 2. The Battle of Gettysburg was the final battle of the Civil War. That's the lie. Even though the Battle of Gettysburg is seen as a turning point in the Civil War for many people today, it was not the final battle of the war. The battle took place in 1863, and the Civil War ended up raging for 2 more years after that. That means number 3 is also true. General Lee's men called themselves Lee's Miserables. We learned that Victor Hugo's novel, Les Miserables, was a popular book during the time of the Civil War. And on the Confederate side, Lee's men had taken to mispronouncing the title of the book, as many people do, and they called themselves Lee's Miserables. Thank you so much for spending your time with us today. Before I let you go, I want to show you some of these. Now, if you're not watching the video version, I am holding up some Based on a True Story stickers. I've got a few extra ones laying around, so if you'd like a Based on a True Story sticker, just shoot me an email at dan@basedonatruestorypodcast.com to let me know how you found out about the show. And don't forget to include an address to send the stickers to. This is while supplies last, of course, so no guarantees that I'll have these stickers or any stickers at all. I mean, if you're seeing this years from now, who knows? But you can always still shoot me an email to find out. Don't forget, if you heard ads on today's episode, you can get rid of those if you want by subscribing to the producer's feed, either in Apple Podcasts or on Patreon. Learn all about that over at basedonatruestorypodcast.com/value or use the link in the show notes. That's all for today. Until next time, thanks so much for listening, and I'll chat with you again really soon.